Okay. All right. So, what we have been looking at so far is this paragraph in Matthew or Hebrews 8 where it's kind of been a summary paragraph. I'll go ahead and look at it here. Last week, we kind of looked at a couple of the major verses here. This whole chapter, and hopefully you can kind of see where it seems as though the author is really kind of reaching a summary point. He's gone to great lengths for the past few chapters to illustrate what the high priest does, what his goal is, his purpose, and his mediation, his intercession. He talks about the atonement. He talks about all these various functions of Christ in heaven. And then we get to chapter 8, and he kind of opens it up, and he just says, now the point in what we are saying is this, okay? Summary statement. Just immediate summarization of everything, and then he tells you the summary. And this is kind of the culmination of 2 chapters of work. We have such a high priest, okay, comma. What is this high priest? One who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, okay? Tells you his position, right? And then his work, a minister in the holy places in the true tent that the Lord set up, not man. And so, effectively, this describes for us the fact that the tabernacle is a heavenly construct. It is something that was always in heaven, and that is derived from this wording right here. The true tent, okay, when we see tent, almost indicatively every time especially in the book of Hebrews, but throughout the New Testament, we're talking about a very specific tent. We're talking about the tabernacle, right? That is the tent, the definite article, singular tent. And the tent that the Lord set up. This Greek word here, this is something that we looked at last week. Set up, that's a word for like to pitch something, to use like sticks and strings to affix something. This is definitely talking about like you would set up a tent, a tabernacle, a temporary structure of some kind. The idea here is that the Lord designs and builds a true tabernacle, right? The tabernacle that was on earth was always designed to be a pattern, a copy. We're going to get to that here at the end of this this little section, which I hope we'll get to tonight, that it was a pattern of something more heavenly. And that kind of flies on the face of the Hebrews argument, which up to this point has been, why are you changing our covenant? Right? That's kind of been the problem with the Hebrew Christians up to this point. You're altering the covenant. How can the Lord adjust and or change his covenant? How can the Lord's word change? And that's kind of one of their major complaints against Christianity, right? How can you claim that the Mosaic covenant, the Aaronic priesthood, all of these systems that the Lord has instituted himself for 1,500 years, how then does the Lord change? And the argument is it was never designed to be, and it was always prophesied to be temporary. It was always created to be temporary. And one of the reasons you can give for that is because it was a copy. Even at Moses' point in time in origin, it was a copy. It was already copying something in heaven. And that's effectively all that we looked at last week. So this time I'll kind of want to look at this little parenthetical section that you see that starts here and ends here. And he kind of describes these 2 sentences, right, which have kind of been like the summary of the point of what we're saying is the high priest and who he is and what he does. Then you see 4, every high priest is appointed to offer gifts and sacrifices. Okay, very general statement about what priests generally do. Thus, it is necessary for this priest, singular, note this is singular right here, one single priest, also to have something to offer. Now, if he were on earth, he would not be a priest at all, since there are priests who offer gifts according to the law. I'm reading out of the ESV, by the way. They serve a copy and a shadow of heavenly things. For when Moses was about to erect the tent, he was instructed by God, saying, see that you make everything according to the pattern that was shown you on the mountain. And then you have kind of this conclusion, but as it is, Christ has obtained a ministry that is much more excellent than the old, as the covenant he mediates is better, since it's enacted on better promises. So here, I mean, kind of playing my hand for a couple weeks in the future, but he takes us, he basically, in effect, says the old covenant is rebuilt. It is redesigned. It is supposed to be lesser than the new covenant. It's supposed to be, in a word, worse, to put it crassly, than the old covenant. This is a better covenant. It's enacted on better promises. So anyway, we'll look at the translation here. Or I'll just this is John Owen's kind of summary of this whole section here. He says, the reason he insists on is taken from the general nature of the office of every high priest, that the Lord Christ is our high priest. He has sufficiently demonstrated and confirmed before. Okay, so this is very Puritan language here. He's saying, the author has already said this is the high priest. That's been pretty well confirmed. This, therefore, he now assumes as granted. And hereon, what belongs unto him as such, he further manifests by showing what the nature of that office required and what did necessarily belong to everyone that was a partaker thereof. So he says, as a result of that, now you look at what priests do. It's been established he is the high priest. Christ is the ultimate high priest. So what does he do? What's his purpose? Why is he a high priest, and why do you need that? And we see that kind of partially demonstrated from verse 3 here. So we'll translate this out of Greek. So in Greek, this would be a universal particle, all or every. Actually, this would be singular. So we would say every for, G-A-R, gar, for arche Arius, high priest, right? We looked at this. Arius is priest, starting with the iota there. Arius, and arche is the beginning, the type priest. This is the ultimate priest. Ace to prospherain, to the, this is an infinitive, so this is kind of an awkward word to translate into English, but it's like to be offering up something, to be holding something up to somebody else, to the offering up. We'll put it that way, very woodenly for now. What does he offer up? Dora, gifts. Te, kai, thusias. And the thusias, sacrifices. Okay, he does two things. He offers up gifts and he offers up sacrifices. And has this little verb at the end, kathistatai. This is like he is appointed. He's ordained. He is set in place to do this on some level. He is, we'll say, appointed for our purposes right now. Someone or something external set him up to do that. And then you have, you see the little period there. In Greek, a period is, or a period in the middle right there is almost kind of like a semicolon. It's a comma. It's a break of sentence. So you have othen, so then, anakaion, necessary or required, non-negotiable. Ekain, to have. Tai kai tutan, this is like, we'll put this, this, and I'll put it just very woodenly. These. Ha, pros, and egke, which he offers up. You might be able to see this is similar to this word. To offer up and he offers up is very similar. So it's the same verb right there. That's the same construction that's used there. So, very woodenly, if we translate this, for every high priest to be offering up gifts and the sacrifices, he is appointed, right? I know I've mentioned this before. Greek is kind of like Yoda's speech. They don't really care about word order like we do in English. They care a lot more about inflection on each word, and you can see how even the same words have different lettering in them. They care a lot more about lettering their words to drive how you're supposed to speak it. So the necessary to have, which, and this is, which he offers up. Okay, so he offers up the gifts and the sacrifices to which he's appointed. That's kind of the bottom line. So, if we take this and we look at a couple of the key words, the key verb by far is this one, right? To offer up. This is the priest's job, right? Okay, here we have our first action of priesthood. What's he do? What's his whole purpose? He offers something up. What does he offer up? He offers up two things, gifts and sacrifices. And then we also see kind of another, shall we say, descriptor of the priest. Why? Because he's appointed to do so. Okay? His job is he's set in place to accomplish this effect. So, the first, if we look at the verb here, this is actually a compound word. Let me see if I can point that out here. So, for Greek purposes, If I were to, like we have compound words in English, if I were to divide this up, pros means in front of you. It means forward. It's a preposition in English. It's in front of you and to be pushed in front of you. And then pharaoh is to carry. So it's like to carry forward something. And kind of the idea here is like if you're in a courtroom or a regal room or a royal throne room, you carry it in front of you, right? It's kind of like you're offering something up. This is supposed to be like some kind of important emblem that you're holding up to the king or the lord or the priest or whatever it may be. And this is a priest's primary job, right? He offers something up. And now remember, priests can do lots of things. This is not his only job. This is certainly not Christ's only job, right? This is certainly not the job for 1,500 years. They taught, they were teachers, right? That's well indicative. They were students in a lot of ways. It was their job to be well versed in the law. Their livelihood and their ability to perform required them to know the law, right? They had to be scribes. They had to be well versed. They had to be teachers. In some cases, they were some of the laws in the old Mosaic covenant kind of dictate they were in some ways kind of the medicine men. They were the doctors. It was their delegated by God job to observe wounds in certain cases. A disgusting job. But their primary job was this. They offer something up, right? And we know this word, so you can look this up if you want a Strong's Concordance, this word, and you can find let's see, about 42 different references, or 45, excuse me, 45 different uses of this word. I do think it's ironic that 18 of them, of these 45 uses, are in this book in Hebrews to be offering something. The vast majority by far talks about priests offering something up, and I think that kind of gives a little bit of detail about it. Here's some, just for some examples, here's two other examples of the use of the word, and we looked at Matthew. So his fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought him all the sick. That's the word right here, prospero. They offered him all the sick. And that kind of gives you this almost humble, please heal my son, right? Please heal X, Y, or Z. They offered him up to him and he healed them, right? Another use that's less, more negative is in Acts 8, right? This is Simon, the liar, the one who is a magician. He's clever. And he says he offered them money, right? He says, give me some power so I can be popular, and I can leverage the Holy Spirit for money. All of these uses kind of imply something that is important, and it's probably already derived, but offering is not the same as acceptance, right? This is the gesture. This is the initiation. The Lord may or may not accept your offering, and that's been seen all the way back to Cain and Abel, right? You can offer things to the Lord. You can offer him strange fire. You can offer him sacrifices such as Cain and Abel. Doesn't necessarily guarantee the result. But that's not the priest's job. The priest's job is to hold it up, right? His job is to be the one that goes before you to God, because you cannot. But what does he offer up? He offers up two things. And I know we looked at this extensively in chapter 7. There's two major types of things that Mosaic priests do. And you can read Leviticus, really, I want to say 1 through 12 is kind of the preliminary bylaws of the priesthood, and specifically all the offerings and types of offerings. And you'll find there's several different categories, actually. I mean, if you really wanted to be a stickler, you could create 5 or 6 different categories. But I'm going to argue for 2 very broad categories. You could give a gift. There are offerings that priests can give that have nothing to do with sin whatsoever. They don't have anything to do with you trying to forgive sins of any type. You can give a grain offering. You can give a drink offering. I believe in Leviticus 2. You can check me on that. But there are cases of offerings that are just simply thanksgiving. You can just give a gift of goodwill to the tabernacle, to the Lord. That was something you could do, and there were stipulations about how you do it and what you give and how much you give, etc. But you certainly could. You could give worship offerings, general goodwill offerings to the Lord, seeking his favor or his will in some circumstance or whatever have you. But that's very different from sacrifices. Okay? Sacrifices are specific. Sacrifices require blood. Sacrifice means something died. That was almost in every case where sin was being forgiven. There had to be a blood atonement in every case. Nowhere was sin or wrong or immorality that was forgiven. And bear this in mind too, in the Old Mosaic Covenant, there were sins that were unforgivable. There were sins you just got stoned for. That was the end of it. They just killed you. Adultery or murder, you would just die. In the Mosaic Covenant, there was no forgiveness that Moses offered whatsoever for some sins. But for the sins that would be forgiven, there had to be blood. An animal had to die, and blood had to be poured out for a certain sin. So that's very different from gifts. So this kind of implies two things about a priest. He can go before God simply out of goodwill, out of thankfulness, out of prayer, out of a semblance of just general asking for guidance. Or he can go out of his way to atone for your sin, right? And both of these are encapsulated in Christ. I'll go ahead and play one of my cards now. You can see both of these in the work and the mercy and sacrifice of Christ. He atones for your sin, right? He does accomplish the blood sacrifice. He makes forgiveness possible to the nth degree. But even in addition to that, he could stop there, but he goes further. We know that he actively intercedes for you on behalf of God. Romans 8 makes clear, right? When you pray imperfectly, the Holy Spirit, I believe it's Romans 8, check me on this, Romans 8:30 dictates that the Holy Spirit actively intercedes on your behalf, right? When we are imperfect prayers, we cannot pray perfectly. The Holy Spirit is aware of that, it knows that, and it intercedes on your behalf. God, out of simple goodwill and kindness, will enact his generosity to intercede on your behalf, not even necessarily trying to atone for sins whatsoever. That is an act of God's mercy, right? Christ accomplishes both of these things. And we know, finally, the third descriptor in this verse is priests are appointed, right? An external, outside force puts them in place. And we know this word for appoint somebody, it's used 20 times in the Greek New Testament. It's pretty straightforward, right? There's no great mystery of translation here. You can see it in Matthew 24. This is that parable that Jesus speaks, and he says, who is the faithful wife servant whom the master has set over his household? That's the same Greek word right there. To appoint somebody, to set somebody in a specific spot and or place. Luke 12, right? This is where the guy comes, and in Luke 12, this always kind of cracked me up. This guy's trying to get some inheritance, or he's greedy, and he's fighting with his brother over inheritance. And Jesus, who very well could say he's a judge, right, has full capacity to judge over both of these men. He says, man, who made me judge or arbitrator over you? Unbeknownst to him, right, he will 100% judge both of them on the final day. But at this time and place, no, he's not going to judge between and get in the middle of these two squabbling over inheritance. Who appointed him, right? Who set him in place? All of this kind of very much is reminiscent of what we already looked at in Hebrews 5, which we'll look at here in a minute. If you go look at Hebrews 5:1, it's almost the same verse as this verse, verbatim. The priest's job is to offer up, same word, gifts and sacrifices, same words, that he's appointed to do. And someone sets him in that place. And we know this is true of the original priests and the high priest, right? There was no election for high priest. You were genetically born to that role. If you were the son of the father of the high priest, you were the high priest. Congratulations. It was the simple passing through genetic bloodline. Same thing for Christ, right? In terms of he's appointed, he's ordained, he is set in place, and there's no election process. No one decided that, or it was just simply decided and determined pre-eternity by the Father, right? It is supra-appointed. It is simply set in place by his Father. One last little word we can kind of look at in the Greek here. The priest's job, as described in verse 3, it is necessary to have this to offer up, right? This is a non-optional aspect of the priesthood. I'm looking for it here. Got lost in my own slides. It is a non-optional aspect of the priesthood to be offering stuff. Specifically, It's not optional. You cannot go before the Lord empty-handed, is kind of the implication of this verse, right? In a priestly sense. If you're a priest of the old covenant and you want to have mediation with God, you want to intercede on behalf of a sinner, unless you are Christ, you do not have the capacity to do that by yourself, right? You're sinful, and the person you're probably interceding for is most certainly sinful. None of that's going to fly unless you can appease wrath somehow, right? From an old covenant standpoint. Now, we know Christ does this with himself, right? Christ accomplishes this through his own righteousness. But either way, all these priests, by definition, if you're going to appease the wrath of God, you better bring something to appease his wrath. And that's exactly what Christ does. So priests, by definition, must appear before God with a specific offering of sorts. A priest's job is to mediate above all else. So this kind of tells us a couple details about Old Testament priesthood, and really, hopefully by implication, also Christ, which is one, a priest is primarily a mediator, right? He can be a lot of other things. He can be a teacher. He can be an elder. He can be a student. He can be a very good scribe. He can be all these things. But his primary role is he cannot intercede or mediate for anybody unless he brings something on your behalf in the Holy of Holies, right? His primary job is to be a mediator. Even if other tasks might be assigned to him, it is necessary that he bring in a gift and or sacrifice to accomplish that goal, right? He has to mediate, and he's not going to mediate unless he brings something. He has to bring the sacrifice before God to make sin clean again. Here we go. So you can kind of see almost verbatim, same passage. Now, not quite verbatim, but almost verbatim in 5:1 of the same book. For every high priest, now he does designate here, probably the biggest difference is you see here's the singular high priest. In 8:3, it's priests. Chosen from among men is appointed to act on behalf of men in relation to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins, right? Same idea. So this is kind of the second time this author's hammering this home and kind of summarizing everything from chapter 5 up in chapter 8, here at the very beginning. So he highlights the specific job and purpose of the priest to effectively make a bridge. That's his initial goal, is to make possible your right relationship with the Father. And he defines it further in verse 4, which I will translate here. Because 3 through 5 you can really see are kind of their own parenthetical section. And verse 4, he says, now this starts with a conditional statement. You'll see that. If then, and that's what these two, this is if, this means condition, then, therefore, a lot of conditionals here. If then, therefore, he was ein epi geis. He was upon the earth. Geis is earth. So you hear of Gaia, in Latin it's Gaia. If you ever heard of like the old pagan mythologies, Gaius or Gaia, means earth. This is the Greek word for the earth, the dirt. Therefore, if then, therefore, he was on, and I'm going to supply the definite article here in English, the earth, if he was on, or even if you want to take it away, if he was on earth, bottom line, not negation particle, ud on ein erius, not he was priest, right? Ein being he was, so if he was on earth, not he was priest. You say, how does that work? On tone, this is like being for the, scoot this down. I've got a giant, big old participle here. Prosperonton, you probably can see prospero in there, right? The offering up, right? Same idea. Not being for the one's offering up. So a participle in English is a noun and a verb mixed together. You can look this up, and that's kind of what this. So this is kind of like those who offer up, the ones offering up. You can translate it any one of those ways. The ones who are offering up, kata naman, according to naman, law, ta dora, the gifts. Okay, so this is a little rougher in English. We kind of have to string this together a little bit to make sense of this in English translation, and I'm translating it very woodenly here. If therefore he was on the earth, he was not priest, being for the ones offering up, according to the law, the gifts. So, in other words, there were already those people set in place who do offer up gifts according to the law. That's a given, right? Those people existed, which tells us something fascinating here, because the first thing that kind of is confusing is, wait a minute, he was on the earth, right? That seems to be the first implication of this author. You say, wait a minute, author of Hebrews, we know he was here. And that is true. But when he was here, he was not a priest. And there's something specific, and you say, that doesn't make a great deal of sense. We know for certain he was ordained by the Father to be the high priest for all time, not in the Old Covenant sense. We know that because there were already, while Jesus was walking on the earth, there are already people assigned to give gifts according to the law. Okay? Law. This would probably be your keyword right here. Law. We're not saying that he's not a priest. We're not even saying that he doesn't offer up something. What we're saying is he doesn't do it according to the law. Okay? That's a key distinction. Christ, while on earth, was not a priest of the Old Covenant. That's the key idea here. He was in no way involved with the Mosaic Covenant. Even though, if anyone was even remotely qualified, he was. Right? You could make a good argument. We could be very hypothetical for a minute and say that easily, while he was on this earth in 30 AD, if there was any one person qualified to enter the Holy of the Holies at that moment, exactly in the temple in Jerusalem, it was him. He could have walked directly into the Holy of Holies, right? And offered up any sacrifice he wants for anybody, right? He could have prayed to the Lord. He could have given goodwill offerings. He could have done all of that. But he was not, and took no responsibility for and no part of the Old Covenant while on this planet in a priestly sense, right? He did not take any office of Moses, which tells you something else, right? The priests that are on the earth were these guys, and that's exactly what we're looking at here. There were priests that were on the earth. We could call them earthly priests. But they cannot just act at random, right? They have very specific laws they have to abide by. They cannot just strange fire, being case in point, right? The two sons of Aaron, that their names escape me, but if you're going to be a priest, you must act according to the law, right? You must give and sacrifice in very specific ways, and you can only do it in certain circumstances. Those are earthly priests. Right? They were born on this planet into sin, and they were designated by God to act, but only in as much as he allows. Right? They have very specific jobs. They are bound by the Mosaic code. Christ never at any point assumes any part of the Mosaic ministry. Right? There's no point where he becomes an actor that sacrifices or gives gifts on any level in the temple, even if he was absolutely qualified to do so, right? Even if he's fully aware that he is the ordained high priest of God, ultimately, of the new covenant and for eternity, right? But he does not take part in Mosaic sacrifices. So you say, okay, author, what's your point? If that's clear, then what's the purpose of saying that? The purpose of saying that is found in verse 5. Which I'm going to skip down to here in just a minute and come back. So verse 5 is the tricky one. This is the long one. So, oikonos, which, hupadegmati. I'm going to translate. I know there's all kinds of different English translations here. There's like shadows, copies. All of those are pretty synonymous with what we're trying to get to. I'm going to use the word example. Okay? I'm sorry, this is plural. Examples. And skia, shadows. literally a shadow. Laterusin, they minister. Ton epuranion, from the heavens. Uranos is heavens. Epi is from the heavens. From the heavens, these examples, these copies, minister or serve from the heavens, just as kathos, kekre matistai. This is a big old long verb here. This is perfect participle. This would be like having been decreed, past tense, having been stated or having been decreed. This is not just I said something. This is like I decreed it, I declared it, I made it very certain and absolute. You probably see that capital letter there. It's the proper name, Moses, Mosues. Melon, intending or with intention to. Epi telein, to bring about, to accomplish, to bring to completion. Probably be a very long way to translate this. To accomplish is good enough for what I'm trying to communicate for now. Tain, skenain, the tent. And then you see quotation mark. Uragar, this is for you look. And this, I'm putting an exclamation point because ora right here, this A on the end means imperative. This is like a command. Look. It's like issued as a command. Pay attention. Listen. Look. Phrasing. It says, or it states, poieses, you must do. You must accomplish. You must make. Panta, all things, everything. We'll use the word everything. I can spell in English. Everything. According kata ton tupan, according to the tupan, the pattern, the original. Ton dekthenta, that was shown or that was displayed. So, to you. And these last little, I'm going to go ahead and skip down this line and do these last three words. In to ore, on the mountain, on the hill, mountain. In Hebrew and in Greek, they don't really differentiate between a hill and a mountain. They just it's big, it stands up as a hill or it's a mountain. They just call them the same thing. But we know exactly what this is, this hill, this mountain, because he just quoted the Old Testament, and it's probably quoted in most of your study Bibles. This is a quote. This is directly from Exodus. And you can find this in Exodus 25:40, if you want to look that up. And we'll look at that here in just a minute. But he just quotes something directly out of the Old Testament law. So you say, we go back at verse 4 and we say, why does this matter, author? Why does it matter that Jesus didn't do any of the Mosaic covenant? He doesn't become a high priest of Moses' temple while on earth, even if he was innately qualified to do so. Why? Why do we care about that? Why does that matter? Because these things are examples and shadows from the heavens. Okay? That's key to our understanding of this text. They're copies. And the original is the pattern which was revealed on the mountain. Okay? So, this is where it gets a little more involved. The word for oops, I don't want to move the slide. Two key words in the beginning, shadows and examples. Okay? Two synonymous words, pretty similar, right? No great translational difficulty here. This word for example is used 12 times in the Greek New Testament. And this typically means almost like a moral example of the other uses in Scripture. If you would look this up and cross-reference this word in Greek, it's usually meant to be some kind of moral or spiritual example, like a parable almost. It's kind of used in that example. John 13 says, I've given you as an example that you do just as I've done to you. This is Christ when he washes the disciples' feet in John 13. And he washes their feet, and then he gets up and he says this. He says, I did this as an example. This is the pattern. right? This is what you're supposed to copy henceforth, right? Do this example like I do it. James 5. James is just kind of a shotgun apostle. He just has a billion points all over many different objects and places. But he says, as an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets, right? He says they are an example to you, and they are held up as this moral example. Peter says, if by turning the city of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them by extinction, making an example of what's going to happen to the ungodly. There's your key word. There's your Greek word right there. So, no great mystery about the translation of this word. Something is here to exemplify something else. But this is a little more interesting. This is literally the word for a shadow. This is literally a shadow, and we know this because it's used 7 times. You can look this up. It's used here, right? And it's used 3 more times that I chose to cite here. Colossians 2, these are a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. But it does literally mean shadows in Matthew 4, right? Those dwelling in the region in the shadow of death, on them a light has dawned. Or in Acts 5, the most literal one is when they would lay out the sick in the streets and Peter's shadow would fall on them. That's the same Greek word there. And so this is quite literally, a shadow is a reflection of the real, right? Of that which is a copy of the original, quite literally, right? It is there to be a type of something to come. So what we're looking at is that there is a sense in which that offering, verse 4, the priests give gifts according to law, right? That's their job. They're earthly priests. They're on earth. Their job is to give the gifts according to the law. That's a shadow of what's to come. That is an example of what's coming later. And we know that because of this word, pattern. Now, this is the Old Testament quote, right? So you must do everything according to the pattern, the tupon. And this is literally, if I can find it here, a word for a type. And I mean like an actual type, like I know I'm using a more modern term, like a printing press. Like you set a type, and it's the original, and you print out a bunch of sheets, and they're all the same. But they had very rudimentary types, even in ancient times, where like seals and rings, that was the type, right? And you could print out as many as you want of the same thing. This is literally the word for the hardware, like the original piece that you use to set everything up. And so the implication is that when you read Exodus 25:40, Moses, it says, God tells Moses, this is the type, right? This is the pattern. Build the temple and the tabernacle. And if you look at Exodus 25, it's all the instructions really on the Holy of Holies. And you can look this up. Exodus 25 is how you set the showbread table and where you're supposed to place the Ark of the Covenant. He's talking about the design of the interior, right? And he says, make sure it's all set up according to my pattern, my type. It has to be a copy of the original, right? The pattern that I gave you. And we can see this in 3 places that I know it's used 15 times, but the 3 I cited is here you can see Paul says it in Romans 5, from Adam to Moses, the transgression of Adam, who was a type. Adam's a type of Christ, right? There's a whole branch of theology called typology, right? You can delve through the Old Testament. You can find all kinds of what theologians call types and antitypes and typology and how you can derive them. 1 Corinthians 10:11. Now, these things happened as example. Now, that word there, I know I used the word example as another Greek word earlier, but that is the word type. And that's this tupon word. You can find it also in Titus 2:7. Show yourselves in all respects to be a model, a type of good works, right? He is supposed to be the one that everyone else emulates, Titus. He's supposed to be the one that you should look at him and be able to see good works and integrity and dignity and sound speech, and typify that, right, to the rest of the congregation or the rest of the people of the island of Crete, which is where Titus works. So this tells us something significant. The type is a heavenly type, right? If you look at this verse, the idea here is that these examples and shadows minister from the heavens. Why? Because it was decreed to Moses, make sure you make it according to this pattern. There's an original somewhere, and it was not built by Moses. And it was not built by Aaron, and it was not built on this planet. The original is in the throne room of Christ, right? The original type is God, is the throne room, right? It is the tabernacle. It is that the tent, the true tent in verse 2 that God set up, right? The original tent, which really is mostly mind-blowing to these guys. These guys think they have the original, right? It has been believed for 1,500 years we have the type. Moses and Aaron specifically, built the type in the desert, right? It was a tent, and it had 3 sections. That was the type. That was not the type. It was an example and a shadow of the actual pattern, right? Which is the throne room of Christ, the tabernacle where Christ now sits, and he is the high priest there, right? Just like a high priest worked and ministered in the tabernacle with Aaron, and for 1,500 years, a high priest worked in the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle on this planet. There is now the original pattern, which is in heaven, where Christ, the high priest, ministers before the throne of God. That's the original. And so this kind of flies in the face of their thinking, right? This forces them to come to grips with this entire covenant was a pattern of something greater. This whole covenant, this entire priesthood, the laws, the sacrifices, the covenant, all of it is a shadow of a pattern of what the original is. And I can't help but think, I know he's got some interesting other views, but C.S. Lewis was the one who argued for this in The Great Divorce in his book, which is that we live in the shadows. Here, the earth is less real than what is truly real, which is in heaven. He argued that that which is ultimately real is not here on this planet. We are the shadows, right? We are the types, or we are the antitypes, I guess I should say. We are the examples. And in a real way, this applies to this covenant here, right? This covenant is not designed to be the ultimate real covenant. It was never designed to be that way. And that's kind of the theology of everything he's arguing here for. MacArthur puts it this way in his commentary. He says, certain Greek mystical philosophers held that everything we see and hear and touch is a shadow or reflection of its real counterpart in another world. I'm going to tell you what this is. If you ever heard of Plato's forms philosophy. So Plato, in, let's say, 3rd century BC, if you go read Platonic philosophy, and you can see it all the way down through Augustine, he believed in the forms. Okay, so here's some secular Greek philosophy for you. So Plato theorized, he said, everything on this planet is a shadow of the real thing in a realer realm. So he would say, he would take a chair, okay? He would say, this chair is just a shadow of the real essence of the ultimate chair, which is in the ethereal realm. That's Plato for you. He would say there's somewhere, every time everyone sees and identifies a chair, they know it's a chair. They're told it's a chair. They understand that it's a chair. So every human being is born with some innate knowledge of chairness. And this is secular philosophy. This is, and somewhere in the ethereal realm is the ultimate form of chair that all human beings are endowed with. And basically, he would apply that argument to like justice. All human beings know to a degree what justice is, or to a degree what mercy is, or to a degree what righteousness is. And so somewhere there must be this ultimate form of justice or righteousness, and all human beings are just little copies of that. That's what Plato would argue. And MacArthur says it's not entirely, we shouldn't throw that entirely out the window. Somewhere there's a universal true horse, for example, of which the ones we ride here are shadows. Somewhere there's the true chair, of which we sit, those we sit in are only reflections. The writer of Hebrews is saying very much the same thing. He's not a Greek philosopher. He's writing the revelation of God, but in some regards, these philosophers are not too far afield. As far as completeness and perfection and permanence are concerned, our physical world is less real than the eternal. The old covenant and all its rituals and ceremonies and altars and sacrifices and tabernacle and temples are but shadows and types, pictures and reflections of the realities of the new. These all had heavenly patterns. Earthly worship, even the most sincere and godly, is only a remote reflection of what worship is like in heaven. The earthly priesthood is only an inadequate shadow of the real priesthood. And I believe that. That is, C.S. Lewis was right to that degree. I believe He writes that in the last battle in the final chronicle of Narnia, and he makes that clear in his more adult theology, The Great Divorce, right? There is a realer sense of the spiritual realm that everything that God presented in the Old Covenant was just supposed to typify, right? And so this is exactly what we're looking at. And it kind of adds another layer, too, of why this was so serious. A lot of times, you say, why would God kill the sons of Aaron who offered strange fire, even if they meant well, right? Even if the sons of Aaron meant to do well by offering strange fire before the Lord, he just kills them innately. That seems a little bit harsh, but it adds this layer of importance to why God is so strict about why he was so serious about why you must build it this way. You must act in this way. You must sacrifice just so. You must build the temple just so. Why? Because it's a pattern. He didn't just make this up originally. It's a pattern of something greater. It's supposed to be an exact copy, or not an exact copy, but an earthly copy of something specific in the heavenly sense. So he did take it very seriously. One last quote, then I'm done. Jesus had already ministered the one final blood sacrifice that is sufficient for all people for all time. This work of his is completely finished because there is no need, and there will forever be no need, for any additional sacrifice for the cleansing of sin, right? The atonement is final. We understand that. There's no continued atonement. But the need for his redeemed people to come to the dedication and commitment and thanksgiving is not over. These gifts, he uses that word on purpose, of praise and thanksgiving, Jesus continues to minister for us before his Father. None of us can praise God or thank him or commit or dedicate himself in worship, obedience, and service to him apart from Jesus Christ. So MacArthur's basically saying, even what you do now, right? When you pray, when you worship, when you serve the Lord in any sense, all of that is only pleasing to the Lord because Jesus Christ makes that possible in his intercession for you now, right? The gift you're giving has to be given by a high priest, right? Just as no Israelite could offer either gift or sacrifice to God except through a priest, so Christians cannot do so except through their high priest. It is obviously necessary then that Jesus continue to minister on our behalf. So I'll go ahead and stop there. But I believe that is correct. I am convinced that the intercession of Christ is the ongoing work of not only sanctifying us, not only justifying us, but in effect, rendering us pleasing to the Lord, right? In his accomplishments. And that even now innately, we do not rely upon our own strength to be pleasing to the Lord, right? He makes that possible. So I'll go ahead and stop there. We can do